Great. So the reading is from Luke chapter 12, and it can be found on page 44 of these little Luke's Gospels, starting at verse 13. So Luke chapter 12, starting at verse 13 on page 44. Someone in the crowd said to him, that's Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops?' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God.'"
Sarah, thanks very much indeed. It's great to be with you. Thanks for coming this lunchtime. Do keep that Bible passage open. And I think you might also find it helpful if you like to follow along, see where we're going. On the back of the notice sheet, you'll find a little outline of where we're going in the next few moments. Now, what we believe to be successful will be different to each one of us. It might be an interesting conversation to have afterwards. But I think it's fair to say that the people we aspire to be like, the people that we think are successful have usually reached the top. You know, they're sort of a number one in their sport, a box office attraction in entertainment, fabulously wealthy in business. All that said, for most people I speak to, it's really, success is really not about being famous or loaded. It's about being happy and content. And being happy and content usually means being comfortable, you know, having a comfortable lifestyle, a reasonable house, a large enough disposable income to be able to have nice holidays, enjoy trips to the theatre, give the children a good education, all that sort of thing. Well, today, in this Bible passage that Sarah's just read for us, we get from Jesus a perspective that will really help us to be able to evaluate success. And we're already at the first point on the handout, so that's encouraging. We're rattling through the situation. Have a look at verses 13 to 15 with me. If you look at chapter 12 and verse 13, Jesus is speaking to a crowd of people, and a bloke in the crowd who's recently bereaved shouts out, look at verse 13, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." It seems that someone in this fellow's family has died, and when the will was read out, it resulted in an almighty row between him and his brother. And now they're arguing about who gets Granny's clock and the antique sideboard. And this aggrieved brother wants Jesus to act as the judge in the small claims court. But Jesus says, "That's not my job, mate. I'll leave that to your solicitor to sort out." Well, you know, that's my interpretation, but I think that is what verse 14 is basically saying. "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And then Jesus turns to the crowd. And verse 15, he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions." It is a fascinating moment. Before this man shouted out from the crowd, Jesus had been talking about the most important issues in the world, the issues of life and death, of heaven and hell, and being right with God. And all this bloke in the crowd can think about is the share of his will. And so when he shouted out and said, you know, "Share the inheritance with me," Jesus then turns to the crowd and says, "Take care," verse 15. "Watch out. Be very careful." This is basically, I think, what Jesus is saying in verse 15. Be very careful that you don't reduce life to being about nothing much more than accumulating stuff. Jesus says life is about much more than family heirlooms and money in the bank and a big house and a fancy car and fine dining and first-class travel. And he says death of all things should make you realize that. And to make the point, Jesus then tells a brilliant story which begins at verse 16. And we're now on the second point of the handout. Now, I love this story. But before we go and look at it, let me ask you this question. Who do you most aspire to be like? You know, who do you kind of look up to? Who do you find yourself looking at and thinking, "I would love to be in their shoes"? I wonder who it is, a successful businessman or woman, a social media influencer, Or if you're into the celebrity culture, a sporting star, royalty, Hollywood actor, the sort of person that you read about in OK or Hello magazine. Oh, by the way, this is not mine. I borrowed it from Chris. Anyway, let me assure you, I wonder who it is that you're thinking, I would love to be in their shoes. And I ask that question because before diving into this story, because I reckon when we do look at this story, we're going to meet someone who many of us would say, I would love to be like him. Look at verse 16 then. Jesus told a parable saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I'll do this. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods. It's not difficult to understand what's going on. It's harvest time in the story, and it's the story of a very successful farmer. A farmer who gets a bumper crop, an unexpectedly enormous yield, so he built bigger barns. A good friend of mine calls this man Sir Cecil Barnes. He says, because he was successful and he built barns, Sir Cecil Barnes. So we'll call him Sir Cecil from now on. And it's harvest time, and Sir Cecil has a much better crop than he ever expected. And before he knew it, he reached the point that most people only ever dream of, total financial security. In city terms, he's an entrepreneur who's spotted an opportunity to make a fortune, and then he's grabbed it with both hands. He's taken his idea into the dragon's den, and all the dragons have loved it and offered him all the money he asked for a very small stake in his company. And in no time, the idea has absolutely flown, and he's made a fortune. His business outperforming all the competitors. He's so successful, he features in the New Year's Honours List, knighted by His Majesty. In terms of wealth, he's Sir Jim Ratcliffe of Ineos or Selena Blavatnik of Warner Music, men who are both worth over £25 billion. That's Sir Cecil here in the story. And so having planned and worked hard, the time arrives when, verse 19, he said to himself, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. He's living the dream with not a financial worry in the world and with no need to ever work again. He takes early retirement before he's 50. In Hello magazine, there's a picture of him in the middle, standing outside his mansion, and next to his Aston Martin DB11, and underneath the picture it reads, Sir Cecil Barnes, who retired this week, saying, I'm going to take life easy, I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. See, that's verse 19, isn't it? Now, I don't know about you, but as I look at him, I have to say I would love to be in Sir Cecil's shoes. And that's what makes the first line of verse 20 so devastating. I'm looking at Sir Cecil, thinking I want to be him. God's looking at him and says, fool, this very night your soul will be required of you. So he's at his retirement party. The last guests have left. It's been a marvelous evening. Everybody congratulating him on such a brilliant career. And as the catering staff are clearing up, his wife retires to bed, and as she goes up the stairs, he says to her, I'll be with you, up with you in a moment, darling. He wanders into the drawing room. He pours himself a brandy. And the congratulations from his friends and colleagues are still ringing in his ears. There are holiday brochures on the coffee table for safaris and cruises that he's planning to go on. But the brochure that really catches his eye is the brochure for the Bentley that he's going to take delivery of on Monday morning. And as he picks it up and he says to himself, you've done it. You've made it. You've retired early. You've plenty laid up for yourself for years and years. Now, Cess, enjoy life, my son. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and suddenly there's a searing pain in his chest, and he's dead before he hits the floor. See, that is verses 19 and 20. Sir Cecil says, verse 19, I will say to my soul, soul, you've ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. So they hold a memorial service for him. In their eulogies, chief execs from the city say what a brilliant entrepreneur he was. His obituary in the Times says what a shrewd investor he was. And God says what a fool he was. That's the shock. Many words of praise from the great and good, but just one word from God, fool. And at this point in the story, we have to ask ourselves, do we still want to be in the shoes of Sir Cecil Barnes? Well, look, it's a story, but it's not a fairy story. I've taken funerals of men like this. I will never forget the words of a tearful widow as we were sitting in their front room preparing her husband's funeral. She said to me, he worked all his life for his dream retirement cottage in Dorset. They'd booked the removal van to go down to that perfect cottage, but he died before he ever got to move. And this is not just for those nearing retirement age either. Desperately, death is no respecter of age. Just last week, you might have noticed in the sporting world, well, the sporting world was shocked by the death of the runner and marathon world record holder, Kelvin Kipton, aged just 24. And last week in the world of entertainment, Strictly Come Dancing star Robin Windsor died aged 44. It really can happen to anyone. And so quickly, it was that quick for my dad. He and Mum had spent a wonderful week with us. Dad was talking to me about the plans that he had to celebrate his and my mum's 60th wedding anniversary that was in a few months' time. 2 days later, I got a telephone call in the middle of the night from my brother. He was calling from the hospital. My dad was dead. That's what happens in this story, totally out of the blue. And here's the thing, Sir Cecil had everything he ever wanted, but now he's dead. And the money? Where did all the wealth go? Well, that's the question you see at the end of verse 20. Well, who knows where all the wealth goes? It may have gone to a son who was a worthless fellow, blew it all on drink and gambling, and broke his mother's heart in the process. Of course, we don't know, but it's quite possible that in no time, all the money he'd accumulated was gone. And desperately, so was what really matters gone. In an instant, Sir Cecil Barnes was catapulted into eternity. And Jesus told this story to demonstrate that when it came to eternity, this rich man was poverty-stricken. A wealthy man was nothing, lost everything in this life and the next. And that is the shock of the story, and that's the third point on the handout, the shock. See, Jesus told this story to make us stop and think. Remember what prompted the story. In verse 13, a heckler in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." It really is a remarkable moment. Jesus had been talking about some of the most important issues we could ever think about. If you read back through the section before, you'll see this. He'd been talking about forgiveness and being right with God and life beyond the grave and all that sort of stuff. And all the while, this guy in the crowd was just squabbling with his brother about their inheritance. And believe me, it happens. I've taken funerals where the atmosphere is very tense because before they've even put their loved one in the ground, they're arguing about the will. That's why Jesus said, verse 15, "Take care. Be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions." Jesus says life is not just about stuff. And the story of Sir Cecil says why. Because you can reach the point where you have everything you ever wanted and then die. And so death really should make us think about what really matters and how we handle wealth and how we think about success. And of course, where true riches lie. But for these brothers who have just come face to face with death, rather than tune in to what Jesus has been saying about eternity, their thoughts are only on how much inheritance they're going to get. And so Jesus said, verse 15, basically he says, beware of an attitude to life that quite frankly is nothing more than greedy materialism. And Jesus told this story about Sir Cecil Barnes to lovingly warn us not to make the same mistake. Don't be like Sir Cecil. Don't be so foolish by verse 21, laying up treasures for yourself here on earth, but not being rich towards God. See, that's Sir Cecil, fabulously wealthy, but barely a second thought for God. He was living for himself. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that he was a thoroughly obnoxious man. I mean, we don't know what he was like. Jesus doesn't tell us. We don't know whether he was a faithful husband or an adulterer. We don't know whether he was a good father or whether he beat the children. We don't know whether he paid his taxes or found some offshore loophole. We just don't know. But, well, let's not speak ill of the dead. Let's assume that he was a reasonable bloke. Oh, not without his faults, because none of us are, but largely a decent bloke. But here's the thing. He was still a man who rarely gave God a second thought. Now again, even as I say that, please don't misunderstand this. It's quite possible that if you asked Sir Cecil if he believed in God, he'd have said, well, yes, I think I do actually. I mean, in Israel, in Jesus' day, the existence of God was not in question. So I reckon Sir Cecil would have gone to church. But in his day-to-day, God had very little to do with the way he lived his life. Certainly didn't affect the decisions he made or what he lived for. Sir Cecil didn't live for God, he lived for himself. And you can tell that when you listen to the way he speaks. I'll read from verse 17, and as I do, hear how his words are dominated by I and my. Verse 17, he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you've ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Do you hear it? He's totally wrapped up in himself. In many ways, he had everything. He had treasure, he had leisure, and he had pleasure. But he didn't have a second thought for the one who'd given him all those things. And of course, the question comes, well, where did all his wealth come from? Well, verse 16 tells us it came from the land. And in Jewish thinking back in the day, that wasn't Mother Earth providing, but our Father in heaven who provided. The Lord blessed the earth to produce this bumper crop. Yet there's not a hint of thanks to God from Sir Cecil. Now, I wonder if we're the same. I think it's fair to say that we here have much. Now look, I don't know you all, but I'm saying that because certainly compared to the majority world, we do. We have so much health and wealth and family and fun and happiness and holidays. But my guess is we rarely say thanks to God for all that we have. And look, I don't like it when people take things from me but never say thank you. It's bad manners, but it's worse than that. Jesus says it's foolish because there is a day when we're going to meet God. Next month, our youngest, and we've got 3 children, our youngest, Joshua, will turn 21. It's quite a milestone, isn't it? You know, there's, when all your children are kind of beyond 21. Now, those moments, those milestones make you look back on when they were little. And so I've been thinking back to Joshua's early days. And I was remembering he used to love playing peekaboo. Now, the rules of peekaboo are very simple. You've probably played it either with you when you were young or with any children in your family. Somebody hides and then someone else tries to find them. And when you find them behind the curtain or wherever you are, you'll go peekaboo. It's very simple. But Joshua's rules were very different. You see, 18-month-old Joshua didn't hide. He'd just stand in the middle of the room with his hands over his eyes. And I'd say, where's Joshua? And he'd laugh. Has anybody seen Joshua? Where's Joshua gone? And more laughter from Joshua. I can't see Joshua. Anybody seen Joshua? Uncontrollable whoops of laughter from Joshua. Where is Joshua? He must be somewhere. Side-splitting howls of laughter from Joshua. Whole body shaking with guffaws. And when he could stand it no longer, he'd whip his hands away and everybody would say, peekaboo. It's very funny. Well, I thought it was anyway. And it worked because Joshua thought when he closed his eyes, because he couldn't see us, he thought we couldn't see him. It's silly, but it's great fun, and he was only a little boy. What isn't so amusing is how we play peekaboo as adults with God, thinking that because we can't see him, he can't see us. And that is why Sir Cecil Barnes was such a fool, living for himself, not being rich towards God. I turned 61 at the end of last year. I can't believe it. Now, I know you can't believe it, that I can't believe it, because I definitely look 61. But no, really, I can't believe it, because it only seemed like 5 minutes ago that I was leaving school and had the whole of the rest of my life ahead of me. But suddenly life has pretty much gone. Sooner or later, we find ourselves standing before God. And Jesus says here, before death grabs you, be sure you're rich towards God. Don't be like Sir Cecil Barnes or those brothers squabbling over the inheritance. Don't live for wealth and stuff and the things of this life without any thought of the life to come. Because, verse 15, one's life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions. The house, the holidays, the hobbies, the car, the career, the clothes, all the things we think make us successful, they are not what life's about. So how about it? Look, thanks for coming today. How about looking into how you can be rich with God? If you come here for the first time, thanks so much for coming. It's really terrific. You've come through the rain as well. Maybe you've been coming for weeks, months, years. Well, I hope you know you're very, very welcome. And whether you've been around for a long time or this is your first time, what Jesus says here in verse 21 is be rich towards rich towards God. And the good news is that Jesus can make us rich towards God. And with this, I'll close. If you read the rest of Luke's gospel, you will see that Jesus lived a perfect life, that he lived a life where he always was having God at the center of his life. And then at the end of Luke's gospel, you'll read of Jesus dying on a cross. And as he died on the cross, he said these words, "It is finished." In the original language, it's just one word. It's the word paid. And back in the day, when I was a bit younger, if you paid off a debt, you would take in your bill to the shop, and they would stamp on it "paid," and then it was done. No longer did you owe the debt. And Jesus says, "It is finished," paid in full. And he said that not because he was paying a debt to God, because he wasn't in debt to God. He was, in his kindness and love for us, he said, "I love you so much. Even though you owe a debt to God, I'll pay the debt. I'll die on the cross in your place. I'll take the punishment that you deserve. I'll pay the debt so that you can be rich towards God." It's an amazing thing. So that if we turn to Jesus, because he's paid the debt, when one day our life will be demanded from us, we don't hear him say, "You fool." We hear him say, "Welcome. Welcome home." And we're received into his kingdom with open arms and into a place where we'll be rich beyond all splendor. Isn't that something? I reckon this is the most wonderful thing anyone could ever hear. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of you here are saying, "I'd really like to know some more about this, because this is very good news." Well, if that is you, then a couple of things you could do. One is take away a Luke's gospel. Have it as a gift from us. Read through it. It's an eyewitness account of Jesus' life, and you'll be able to read about him and about what he did for us and more of this amazing teaching of his. And I'm going to put one of these on the table as well. They're just a little booklet that tell you more about what I've been saying, the ultimate life insurance. But thanks very much for coming. I'm going to hand back to Chris.